Why don't we divide by 0? Unlike when I was a kid and I was just told that the universe would erupt into flames if you ever divide by 0, I am actually going to do a little bit of a bonus episode here, if you will, and talk a little bit from the context that we've already been using here in Khan Academy as to why it makes sense that you can't divide by 0 and why some of the common simplistic answers aren't correct. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom out a little bit. And let's talk about groups of objects first. Now, it's tough to visualize because it's always tough to visualize nothing. But let's start easy. Let's start with something like 0 divided by 4, which is something you can do. We know that it's 0, right? You are allowed to divide 0 by 4. And the reason for that is, well, let's see. Let's say I have 0 objects. And I want to divide those 0 objects into 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes. So you have 0 objects and you're dividing them into 4 boxes. I hope it makes sense and I hope it stands to reason that each box has 0 objects inside it. Therefore, 0 divided by 4 is 0. Yeah? If I have nothing to give, think of it like trick-or-treaters. If I have no candy to give and 4 kids come up, they're each walking away with nothing. I think that makes sense from an intuitive level. Now let's look at it from the other perspective. Now let's look at it as 4 divided by 0. Okay? Let's start, as we did before, with objects. In this case, I will have, let's say, 4 objects. There's 1, there's 2, like maybe they're dice or something. There we go. We have 4 objects. We'll call them dice. Okay? And I want to divide those dice into 0 groups, or put them into 0 boxes. I don't have any boxes at all. There are no boxes for me to put the dice into, but I want to divide them up between those 0 boxes. I hope you can see right away what the problem is. I've got 4 dice, but there is no meaningful way to talk about how many of them are going to go into each box, quote unquote, when there aren't any boxes to talk about. It just doesn't, there's no connection there. And that's still a little bit confusing. So we're going to keep looking at this. Let's talk a little bit about arrays, and we're going to stick with 4 divided by 0. Okay? And we're going to look at this kind of from the opposite side. Let's say I have 4 dots, just like we did in previous videos, right? We've got 1, and we want to put them into rows, and I'll just go ahead and make some rows here. But we want each row to have 0 dots. Okay? We are going to try to find a number of rows that have no dots in it each, 0 dots. How many of those rows would it take to make 4? Well, there is no number of rows, there is no number of groups that I can make with 0 each that will get me to 4, or indeed anywhere but 0. So that's kind of the second way of looking at it. And a lot of the time when I say this to folks, their response is, oh, well, that just means it's infinity, right? Like, you would need an infinite number of rows to make 4, right? And no, even that isn't quite right. There are times when the act of dividing by 0 might get you an infinity. There are other times when it might not, but it is all of the time undefined. All we can talk about is what happens around dividing by 0. Once you divide by 0, it just breaks everything. Last little bit here. we've been talking a lot in terms of arrays and groups of objects and visuals. But we've also been talking about multiplication and division in terms of skip counting, right? If I wanted to do 6 divided by 2, I could do 2, 4, 6. Oh, look, it's 3, right? You can skip count. But if you skip count by zeros to try to get to 4, well, it's 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. It's going to be 0 forever. It will never get to 4. And finally, a little bit of a more mathematical take on that. We have learned in this very course that when I say that 4 divided by 0 equals question mark, that is the same thing, that is equivalent to saying that 0 times whatever that question mark is must equal 4. And from a purely mathematical perspective, this is saying the exact same thing we've been saying in the past several examples. There is no number whatsoever that you can multiply 0 by to get anything other than 0. So we don't say it's infinity, we don't say it's negative infinity, we call this simply undefined. And although we will much later in this series, in pre-calculus and later, be talking about what things could be happening in the vicinity of something being divided by 0, we will never actually solve the problem of what is 4 divided by 0 because there is no answer. It is a nonsense question.